Joining me now is former Canadian diplomat Colin Robertson. He's also vice president at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. And in Calgary, Alberta, is Bitcoin entrepreneur Ethan Liu. Thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Colin, let me start with you. So, no sex, no money, no illegality, seemingly, yet Trudeau is under pressure. Is this worthy of the scandal that it seems to be?
Well, in Canadian terms, yes, but in international terms, no. What's happened is that Trudeau, who has campaigned as virtuous, offering hope and competence, is looking less than virtuous and not very competent.
Okay, so Ethan, two high-profile female ministers resigned. The first Indigenous minister, Justice Minister resigned. Is that really damaging to Trudeau?
Oh, well, I think there's no question that it is, of course, damaging. Trudeau set a very high bar for himself when he came into power, and he absolutely took that bar and beat himself up with it. But I would question how much this throws onto the Liberal brand that isn't there already. I think ever since Trudeau came into power, he has not been living up to what he promised. There was the electoral reform, there is reform to government transparency, and then there is the whole botched inquiry into missing and murdered Aboriginal women. So this, it might not be that bad.
Okay, Colin, he's failing to live up to standards across the board. Address that.
I think that the bar was very high. It was a bit like the bar for Obama and Emmanuel Macron. And I think that the public likes to think that a progressive can do all the things that they would like to do, but then reality hits them. I don't think that, I think overall the record has been judged fairly positively until this scandal. And now he's taken a bit of a hit, but whether it will have a long-term impact, that's hard to tell. I think let's wait 3 months.
Yeah, so even though there's no illegality as such, there's the word bribery, Colin, and the OECD's working group on bribery basically said, and I quote, that it's concerned by recent allegations of interference in the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin that are subject to proceedings in the House of Commons, Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. The fact that the OECD is saying this about Canada, this is Canada, right? We're not talking about Syria or, a country known for corruption. The fact that Canada and bribery are in the same sentence, what does that do to Canada's standing?
Well, it hurts the Canadian brand, but let's keep in mind, this is a company that did commit bribery in Algeria 5-6 years ago. Officials resigned. They have been prosecuted, although the prosecutions have not always gone through. So there's no question that this company has done wrong. What the question is, do you punish the entire company or do you punish the malefactors within the company? And there is a provision in the law that passed, and you might question how it passed, for what they call deferred prosecution. And other countries do the same thing. This is a big company, particularly big in the Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau's home province of Quebec. So I think the government had decided for the national interest reason, they would rather go a different way, but the Justice Minister and some of her colleagues chose not to. How that's all going to play out is still to be determined.
Okay, let's bring in Conservative radio host Charles Adler, who joins us now. Charles, Prime Minister Trudeau's saying, I'm protecting 9,000 Canadian jobs, no more, no less.
Well, he's never been able to prove that there would be 9,000 jobs at risk. So the presumption right now among the Canadian people is this is just something that the SNC-Lavalin, the company, lobbyists are saying, because he just can't provide any kind of independent evidence of that. So he's got a huge credibility problem. So number one, we've got a credibility problem because we hate the idea of Canada not having a 100% reputation for rule of law. That's what's most important to the overwhelming majority of the Canadian people. This is just incredibly embarrassing. And it's doubly embarrassing because the Prime Minister of our country has no credibility on the case that he's making to the Canadian people. At least that's what the majority of people are telling me on the phones and on my email, on my messaging. I don't have a scientific poll to offer you, but it would appear right now that this issue is really damaging the government in most of the polls. And the assumption is it's this issue that you and I are talking about right now that is damaging the government's credibility.
Right. Ethan, would you agree with Charles and his conservative audience on his talk show?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't disagree much with him, but I would also say there is another narrative here that Trudeau is trying to help people get jobs in Quebec, which, and I don't want to generalize the people that way, but it is not like the rest of Canada. And there was a column in a Quebec newspaper that said all of this was a conspiracy in order to take down SNC-Lavalin, which is to Quebec what Huawei is to China. It's a crown jewel, and Quebec is the linchpin of liberal power. And in the past few days, in the Prime Minister's non-apology, when he seemed to double down and talk about jobs, it seems that he really wants to go that route, and there could be something to be done there.
Okay, so Colin, do we underestimate the power that SNC-Lavalin has in Quebec itself?
Well, I think there's no doubt that SNC-Lavalin is a Quebec crown jewel, but I would just say that SNC-Lavalin has employees across Canada, but it is primarily based out of Quebec. But it is a lead Canadian firm in engineering, and there's no doubt that members of SNC-Lavalin, committed crimes, corruption, bribery some years ago. And how that's going to play through, as I say, it's still to be determined. There's no question that this has also hurt Mr. Trudeau, and the link to Huawei, where we've taken the Prime Minister says a principled stand around rule of law with the American request for a rendition of the Huawei chief financial officer, Meng Wanzhou. I think people look at these two and say, this doesn't add up. Prime Minister on the one hand does this, and on the other hand, it looks like it's just local politics.
Charles, no matter how much we analyze it, he still hasn't broken the law. Does that mean anything to you?
Well, it does, except that the largest issue for Canadians is the reputation of our country. We care about our country far more than we care about a particular prime minister. We also tend to believe, based on the polls now, this is not about conservative or liberal, based on the polls that the former justice minister, former attorney general, who he demoted, fired, any way you want to put it, she's no longer there. Most people believe her and not him.
Right.
And in this he says, she is winning, overwhelmingly winning the hearts of the Canadian people. So that's a monstrous issue for him. I get that this doesn't appear to be a scandal by world standards, because there's no allegation that the Prime Minister has taken money and nobody has been killed. But by Canadian standards, we're a very, very stable country with a very, very stable rule of law. And it would appear right now that the captain of the ship is not 100% credible. And so that's the problem here. Whether we give you the ship analogy or the airplane analogy, at the moment we don't trust the pilot. That's a problem for our country.
Okay, so Ethan, does the pilot need to be changed?
I think it's going to be hard to change the pilot. I've been lecturing at a local university the past few days, and outside of students in the social sciences, few people have even heard of this issue. And the election, it's a long ways away, and anything can happen between now and then.
Okay, and just to drill down into the details of the actual poll that Charles had mentioned, Colin, let me ask you about that. I've got the figures here. A total of 67% of Canadians now say they believe Wilson Raybould's version of what happened and not the Prime Minister's. So I'm not a mathematician, but that's 2/3, right? So 2/3 of people believe her version of events. They don't trust him. When it comes to the next election, is he going to be out of a job?
Well, I think I'd go back to the poll. I think they believe her account. I don't think that there's, on this issue, yes, I think they tend to believe her, but I think overall they've not lost complete trust in him. His polling is still ahead of the two people who will lead the parties that will be the principal opposition, Mr. Scheer from the Conservatives and Mr. Jagmeet Singh from the NDP. So against himself, yes, he does badly, but against the two others, I think the public they've lost some confidence in him, but they think overall he's still the best person to lead the country. Will this hurt him going into the election? Again, we're 6 months away. Let's wait and see what the issues are then. I think this was self-inflicted. It's still unfolding. Thus far, he has looked less than competent, less than virtuous. If that stays, then I do think that hurts him. But he has proven himself to be a very good retail politician, a very good campaigner. And in Canada, our campaigns, there's a lot of volatility in the voters. You have about a third of the electorate that's ready to swing one way or the other. So it's still a long ways till that 6-week campaign.
Charles Adler, a self-inflicted wound, a dent, but not a major dent. Would you agree with that?
It's not a fatal blow yet, and if you don't mind, I know that sometimes on these shows everybody opposes everybody 100% of the time, so I'm going to disappoint some conservative friends of mine and agree with Colin Robertson on this. Mr.
Typical
Robertson
Canadians, you spoil my show.
So, we believe in consensus here. Look,
right.
On this one note, and it's an important note, campaigns really do matter. I would say that Justin Trudeau, I'm not considered a supporter of his, but I would say that he is one of the best retail politicians I've ever seen. I've seen his father. In fact, I voted for his father when I was 19 years old. And the point I'm trying to make is that once the campaign begins, it's anybody's guess as to what will happen and what the issue will be on the day that we actually vote. But if I'm asked the question, who's the best retail politician in Canada right now, I'd say, well, it's not just me telling you, it's Colin Robertson telling you, and he's a man of considerable experience, and I don't think it's a partisan perspective he's offering. He's accurate, he's credible, he's a great resource, and at the moment, the Liberals have only one strong campaigner, and his name is Justin Trudeau.
Colin, I want to ask about actual sort of political practice, whether the OECD warning, putting Canada on notice, and the scandal that has ensued as a result of this, if this is going to change anything politically on the ground, or how business is done, especially when it comes to mega corporations.
Well, it's part of the reason it's at the OECD is because Canadians wanted to put it there. So in a sense, this is coming back at us. And I do think that, this indeed hurts. And I think the government is going to have to be very careful how they pursue this. I think probably we are going to see the company try, just because the Court of Public Opinion has now decided that it shouldn't get a fast break. Although, again, we'll see how that plays out. Because, again, as Canadians, I do think we are proud of the Canadian brand. Part of what Trudeau has done is make Canadians feel proud about Canada internationally. And this looks like he's still got something to cover to deal with. And so I think that, therefore, yes, it is going to have some effect on how business practices go forward.
Charles, very finally, there's an accusation from the left that the right wing has made a big meal out of the fact that women, and especially an Indigenous woman, resigned from his cabinet because this is Trudeau, the man of a diverse cabinet, and so on. Is that fair that the right wing has milked this?
Well, I don't think the right wing is milking this, and I think if it was, the shoe was on the other foot, and we always have to ask ourselves these questions when people are making partisan remarks. What would happen? What would the Liberals be saying if a Conservative Prime Minister threw out an Indigenous woman, the first Indigenous person to be Justice Minister in Canada? When you look at the horrible record that this country does have, that does embarrass the heck out of us the more we learn about it, our treatment of Indigenous people. So if you ask yourself the question, how would the Liberals in opposition treat a Conservative government that has fired the first ever Indigenous Minister of Justice and Attorney General, I think the Liberals would be just as harsh as the Conservatives are right now.
Okay, Charles Adler, Colin Robertson, and Ethan Liu, thanks for joining us here on the Newsmakers. I've got a wrap.